Have you ever searched the most dangerous cities in the United States? Or maybe the highest homicide rates? I know I have. Today we look at 15 cities that had the highest homicide rates in 2025. I also included some true crime stories in some of these cities. Let's take a look. Number 15, Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk doesn't behave like a dangerous city. That's the first thing you gotta understand. They actually had their homicide numbers hit their lowest level since 1985 in 2025, but they're still at number 15. A few years back, they would have shown up at number 10 on this list. It has water, military bases, quiet residential streets, people who say things like, "It's not that bad," without irony. And for a lot of residents, that is true. Daily life just hums along. The problem is how sharply the experience changes once you cross an invisible line. Violence here isn't spread evenly. It piles up in specific corridors, the kind of places outsiders never see and locals don't talk about unless they're being honest. Norfolk makes this list because the danger is compact, not because it's constant. And compact violence inflates rates really fast. This is the point where people leave comments that say things like, "But I've never felt unsafe here." And that statement can be completely true and completely irrelevant. Just depends on where you are in the city. Now, here's where we get into the true crime stuff, because I started looking up famous homicides in these places, and this one caught my attention because they just solved it on January 20th of 2026. Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. was identified by forensic evidence in the 1987 double murder of David Knobling and Robin M. Edwards. He was 20, she was 14. I don't know the backstory why they were together, but they were together. This happened in Isle of Wight County. And there was another murder in 1989 that this guy was responsible for too. But Knobling and Edwards were last seen alive on September 19th, 1987. The following day, Knobling's pickup truck, and I hope I pronounce his name right, his pickup truck was found abandoned in the parking lot of Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area. Virginia State Police spokesman Corinne Geller said the keys were in the ignition and the radio and windshield wipers were on. 4 days later, their bodies were found along the shoreline of Ragged Island, on the south shore of the James River in Isle of Wight County. They had both been shot and the young lady had been assaulted. Now here's what sucks. The perpetrator of this, Wilmer, died in December of 2017. He was 63 years old. Sadly, he wasn't even in prison or anything like that. He was at home. But Norfolk in 2025 saw 16.5 murders for every 100,000 residents. Number 14, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit's reputation froze in time about 15 years ago. Parts of Detroit are better, noticeably, but that's not the whole story. There are parts of Detroit that are still downright scary. The downtown is doing fabulous, at least in most parts of downtown. They have turned it around, which is great to say because I've been making these videos for 8 years, and for probably 7 of them, they are always on the worst list. The homicide rate does remain high because improvement is in clusters instead of spreading. Investment followed opportunity, safety followed investment. Large sections of the city never caught that wave. So it's like they're solving crimes in areas that are getting developed. And those areas with no plans of getting developed yet aren't getting the same attention. Detroit today isn't a collapse, it's a contrast. You can live in one area and think the city turned the corner. Some 5 miles away, you're still waiting for the corner to exist. So Detroit didn't escape danger, it just stopped being an easy punchline. Now, one interesting case was Donald Miller. Donald Miller was a piece of work. Miller's life took a disturbing turn on New Year's Eve, 1976. Now, this one happened in Lansing, not Detroit, but I thought it was pretty interesting because this guy, who was relatively normal, it seemed, just snapped. This guy invited his ex-girlfriend out to celebrate New Year's Eve. At some point, he pulled in the parking lot at Spartan Stadium in Lansing and decided to strangle her. Well, they didn't find her till October, so when they questioned him, they had no reason to believe anything. They didn't really suspect him. He said he dropped her off, that was that. But in June, he decided to stab a 27-year-old news reporter 17 times. Then later on in June, about a week or so later, he decided to kill a college student at MSU. Then, of course, came his 4th victim, and then he finally got sloppy on his 5th victim, and they got his license plate number. He was put on trial and tried to claim he had multiple personalities, and they were responsible for it, not him, and they did all these mental evaluations of him and decided, no, he's sane, he's just an a-hole. What I like about this one is the guy's still in jail. First of all, he was given 30 to 50 years for one of his attacks. Well, he served that one out, and then they got to his murders, which was only 10 to 15 years. So he served that. Then in 1998, his final case came, time to pay dues, and he got 20 to 40 years for that, so he's still in jail. This name has some bad mojo because there's another Donald Miller serial killer who died in 2005 at San Quentin Prison. That one was killing hitchhikers back in the 1970s and early 80s. But Detroit has been doing better. They're still on the list. In 2025, they saw 17 homicides for every 100,000 residents. 13, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's problem is subtraction. When populations drop faster than social issues improve, the math changes. Neighborhoods hollow out, services thin, remaining residents become statistically louder. Violence that once blended into larger population now defines the rate. Cleveland doesn't feel frantic, it feels tired. And tired cities don't absorb the shock well. And Cleveland's been through quite a few different shocks. Homicides here don't come from chaos. They come from stagnation that never got interrupted. It's just been ongoing. A shrinking city doesn't automatically become safer. Sometimes it just becomes quieter about the same problems. Now, one of the most interesting cases that ever happened in Cleveland happened in the 1930s with the torso killings. This was never solved. An unidentified serial killer dismembered 13 victims in the Kingsbury Run area. Despite being investigated by Elliot Ness, the killer was never caught. In 2025, Cleveland saw 18 homicides for every 100,000 residents. Number 12, Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville exists in two moods. One version feels manageable, walkable, and friendly. The other version feels brittle, reactive, on edge, and in some cases, a little dangerous. The homicide rate rises not because violence dominates the city, but because it concentrates faster than the city can adapt. Growth happened unevenly. Tensions followed those gaps. Louisville still surprises people because you really don't expect it from Louisville. You go to Louisville and it's a good looking city. Then when you start looking at the crime stats and the patterns, you're all, hey, something's up here. Cities can feel comfortable and still be quietly unstable. And I think that's what's going on in Louisville. They also got some pretty high rates of domestic violence too. That's kind of scary. But it's not shocking in Kentucky. Now, they've had some pretty horrific ones, but one that kept popping up while I was looking at different locations is Samuel Little. Samuel Little, he was all over the country, but he had committed some murders in Kentucky as well. They estimate between 1960 and 2012, he murdered between 60 and 93 people. He died in 2020. In 2025, Louisville saw 19 homicides per every 100,000 residents. Number 11, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's violence makes sense once you stop remembering that Happy Days was filmed here. But like a lot of the cities on this list, Milwaukee is a tale of several cities. And it functions like several of those cities are stacked on top of each other. Different rules, different expectations, different levels of risk. Just like every city, most of that violence is going to end up being in the more impoverished parts of the city. Violence often stays trapped where opportunity never reaches. Milwaukee isn't unpredictable, so it's not like every street corner there's danger. It's consistent in the worst type of way. When cities are fractured and separated like Milwaukee is, safety becomes a zip code privilege. In 2025, Milwaukee saw 21 homicides per every 100,000 residents. Number 10, Indianapolis. Indianapolis didn't grow into danger slowly, it slid in. And that's why it feels unsettling. Rapid increases in violence often catch cities mid-transition. Housing changes, policy lags, community structure loosens, and suddenly the city is reacting instead of steering. And that's their case, because not too long ago, Indianapolis was a pretty safe place to live. Now, the people in the city still market the place as stability. The numbers say adjustment is overdue. That's their biggest problem. They need to fix a lot there. Now, I was going to tell you about Sylvia Litkin's murder here, but I think we're going to skip that one. It's a little disturbing. That happened in Indianapolis in 1966, in case you want to look it up. I don't advise it. In 2025, Indianapolis saw 22 murders for every 100,000 residents. Number 9, Richmond, Virginia. Richmond polished itself well on the surface. It's a good-looking city. It's got the James River flowing through town. It's not too far from Williamsburg, and it's kind of big into NASCAR. They got a nice track there. They also got some crime rates that are kind of freaky. But people are still moving in there. They got renovations, new residents, a stronger identity, but homicide rates don't care about aesthetics. Violence here persists because the past never fully detached from the present. Improvement layered on top of unresolved fractures. That's their biggest problem. Overall, their violent crime rate is kind of low. It's actually 6% below the national average, but their murder rate is up there. So that means they don't have a lot of the other types of violent crimes: assaults, the unauthorized use of another person's body, strong arm robbery, stuff like that. They just go out and push each other's off buttons. In 2025, Richmond saw 23 murders for every 100,000 residents. Number 8, Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City's another city that doesn't dominate national conversations about violent crime, or any crime for that matter. That's part of the problem. They should. Violence can grow quickly when attention stays elsewhere. Resources lag, awareness dulls, rates climb without triggering urgency. All the focus seems to be on Memphis, Chicago, and a couple other places, but Kansas City's got some pretty dangerous spots. And it was also home to the first internet serial killer. Yes, John Edward Robinson. He is the first known serial killer to have used the internet to lure victims. He's 82, he's still in prison for 8 murders, so he's going nowhere. He went by the name Slave Master in chat rooms on the internet in the early days. That's a big red flag to me. In 2025, Kansas City had 25 murders for every 100,000 residents. Number 7, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia absorbs violence differently because of its size. Large cities can carry heavy numbers without immediate panic. That delay matters. It allows problems to settle into routines. The homicide rate here reflects neighborhoods where danger isn't episodic. It's expected. Philadelphia does have some pretty scary neighborhoods, including Kensington. That's mostly drug use and a whole bunch of other things, but they do have some pretty scary, violent neighborhoods that should be avoided at all costs. Philadelphia doesn't really feel broken. They've actually gotten a lot better in recent years. They're still doing bad. It just feels burdened. Now, as far as famous murders in Philadelphia go, I think one of the more famous ones is John DuPont in 1996. He was a wealthy dude that was really into wrestling, so he had like this wrestling academy on his estate just outside of Philadelphia called Foxcatcher Farm Estates. Well, he was a little out there and he was getting increasingly paranoid about things, and he decided to drive up one day and shoot Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz and kill him. Back in 2014, they had a really interesting movie. I think it was like an HBO movie starring Steve Carell as John DuPont. Mark Ruffalo was in there, Channing Tatum, and Mark Schultz, who was Dave Schultz's brother. All in all, it's a pretty tragic story. John DuPont died in prison in 2010 at the age of 72. In 2025, Philadelphia had 26 murders per every 100,000 residents. Number 6, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham's got a lot going for it. In recent years, it seems to be in some kind of competition with Memphis for the most dangerous southern city. That being said, Birmingham's position on this list surprises people who don't track these things. I know these things because this is what I do, and their numbers are grotesque. I read this story, well, it was actually like a review of the Birmingham's Civil Rights National Monument, and this woman said she got out of her car about a block away from the place with her kid. They couldn't find parking closer, so they're like a block or two away, and as they got out of the car, this older black gentleman came up and said, "Ma'am, do not get out of your car here." And she's all, "Why?" He's all, "It's very dangerous. You need to go park," I don't know if he said parking lot or closer to the building. And she goes, "There's no place to park." And he's all, "I'll walk you there." So he walked them to the door of the place, and he just told them, "It's a very dangerous place. Make sure you get someone to walk you back." That's kind of sad when it's that dangerous around the Civil Rights Monument. Speaking of civil rights, this was the scene of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963. It was actually the KKK bombed the building and killed 4 parishioners, 3 14-year-old little girls and 1 11-year-old girl. And yes, they caught the guys that did it, and they all got convicted. In 2025, Birmingham saw 28 homicides for every 100,000 residents. Number 5, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. contains many extremes. Extreme wealth, extreme influence, extreme insulation. And on the other side, it has extreme violence, extreme poverty, and extreme anything else that's bad, including homicides. The homicide rate here reflects how well danger can coexist with prosperity when separation is strong enough. And it is definitely separated in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. doesn't lack resources, it lacks distribution. Those resources stay in the good neighborhoods and sort of let the bad neighborhoods fend for themselves. In recent years, the crime rate has been dropping, but it's still in pretty bad shape. But like I said, it's very insulated and very divided. You can go see the mall and you can go see all the monuments and all that stuff and not really have to worry about much. Adventure into the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time and you're going to become a statistic. In 2025, Washington, D.C. saw 36 homicides for every 100,000 residents. Number 4, Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore ranking doesn't change much year to year. And that's their story. They got a good murder rate and they're sticking with it. No spikes, no drops, just a stubborn plateau of violence that programs, leadership changes, and reforms haven't really fixed. When danger becomes stable, it becomes structural. Now, they've had some serial killers and some real ugly murders there, but their biggest problem is the gangs. The gangs have been running parts of Baltimore for too many years to remember. Not just one gang, it's several gangs, and some have come, some have gone. But for the most part, it's just gang violence most of the time. That could be said for a lot of cities in the United States, but Baltimore kind of, in a big way. And it's constant, and consistency can be more alarming than the chaos. They had one interesting dude named Joe Metheny. He killed a couple people, went to jail for that, and then claimed there was actually 13. There's no proof of it. They're not sure if he's a serial killer or just a guy that was trying to make a name for himself. But he went to trial for a kidnapping and a couple murders in 1997. He got 50 years and started spending his time in jail in 1998. He died in prison in 2017 at the age of 62. In 2025, Baltimore saw 36 homicides for every 100,000 residents. That's a little bit shocking. I was expecting their numbers to be a lot higher than that. Number 3, St. Louis, Missouri. Look at that, Missouri gets 2. Most people think of Missouri as a rural state. It is, but it's got some big cities too. And St. Louis has got some crime. Not as bad as its neighbor, East St. Louis, but it's pretty bad. St. Louis remains near the top of this list because violence concentrates intensely and it stays there. Arguments about boundaries don't alter the lived reality. Residents don't experience statistics, they experience patterns, and their patterns usually involve some violence. In 2025, St. Louis, Missouri saw 38 homicides per every 100,000 residents. Number 2, Memphis, Tennessee. For the last few years, Memphis, Tennessee has been the homicide capital of the United States, which that's an award nobody wants. But how stubborn their crime rate is, you'd think they do want it. The good news, it helps keeps their real estate prices down. The average home value in Memphis, Tennessee is $141,000. That is it. You could probably afford your mortgage payment working as the assistant manager at Dollar General. Now, Memphis has a history of really ugly homicides. There was the Leicester Street Massacre in 2008, where this guy named Jesse Dotson murdered 6 people in a house in a brutal home invasion. Of course, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King happened in Memphis. Then, of course, there's the West Memphis 3, which was a pretty brutal killing that grabbed the attention of the country because it had some satanic type worship stuff. It was weird. Now, West Memphis is actually in Arkansas. It's right across the river from Memphis. In 2025, Memphis saw 41 homicides per every 100,000 residents. All right, before we get to number 1, if you have not subscribed to this channel, we'd really appreciate it if you did. And then follow us over there on Facebook. There's a link for that in the description area. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, New Orleans, Louisiana. Yes, besides being hammered by hurricanes every now and again, and besides having all the voodoo and all the hoodoo stuff that you got going on in that city, they got a pretty substantial murder rate. The homicide rate in New Orleans isn't just high, it separates from the rest of the list. City known worldwide for celebration carries one of the heaviest burdens of violence per capita. Joy and danger coexist here without canceling each other out. I mean, people still show up, even though it's one of the most dangerous cities in the United States, or is for that matter. I was there a few years ago. I didn't venture out too far into the other neighborhoods, stayed around Bourbon Street. I was getting on a cruise, wasn't there to see the city, really. But I spent 2 days there. I had a good time, but even my Uber driver was telling me there's certain places you do not need to go. He doesn't even like to take people to certain areas. If he sees a ride that's going to certain neighborhoods or he has to pick them up in certain neighborhoods, He just doesn't take it. So New Orleans has a dark history with some of its most famous murders, including the unidentified early 20th century Axeman. Yeah, that was ugly. The prolific serial killer Ronald Dominique, known as the Bayou Strangler. He killed 23 people from 1997 to 2006. But the Axeman one, it was known as the Axeman of New Orleans, and he happened between 1918 and 1919. He was a serial killer who terrorized the city, breaking into homes and attacking victims with axes, often writing taunting letters, leaving the case unsolved. Nobody ever found out who did this. Remember Samuel Little from earlier that had been all over the country? He committed one in New Orleans too, in 1982. That Axeman one freaks me out. In 2025, New Orleans had 46 homicides per every 100,000 residents. All right, everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other. Don't break into anyone's house with an axe.